Um, but currently, I'm a live touring engineer. I've worked with rock and roll, pop, country artists, both here in the US and certainly internationally. It's After all these years, I still really love my job, amazing as that may seem. And quite frankly, it's really kind of odd right now being in isolation with none of us being able to go out and do what we so much enjoy, and they actually pay us money for it, which is terrific. But just to backtrack a little, really, I got my start mixing bluegrass festivals in the early 80s. Um, and At that time, direct instruments, DIs on bass and stuff were still very much frowned upon and strictly verboten. Everything was live microphones on acoustic instruments. So looking back, that was actually an excellent opportunity to learn about frequencies, especially with regard to two areas, one being acoustic feedback and the other, of course, being the natural tonal qualities of instruments themselves. And even having done bluegrass festivals, I was very fortunate to work with a lot of A-level talent right from the beginning. So that really allowed me the opportunity to get my ears tuned in pretty quick. And of course, that progressed through the years. I went on tour with a bar band for several years, started working for other bands, and eventually worked my way into a few production companies, which led to other gigs and eventually ended up becoming completely freelance in the late 90s. And by that time, I was already taking classes, learning about loudspeaker physics and acoustics. I took the sim class in the late 90s, and that was a huge eye opener in many, many ways. And I left my native country of Canada at the end of that decade. I've been in Nashville here for over 20 years now, and have really enjoyed being able to work with the variety of acts that I have. And in fact, I still go to school every year just to keep up with technology, learn the new tricks and tips, being educated in new consoles. There's so many now from the early days of digital. There's an absolute massive amount of information to learn, but boy, oh boy, for some reason, I still keep doing it.
Well, you seem like a humble guy, but let's not be humble for these students for a moment, and tell them a little bit about some of the artists whose names they would recognize.
Okay, well, currently I'm both mixing front of house for and production managing Billy Ray Cyrus, who's uh, entertained a lot of success over the last year, with the Old Town Road. And I guess some other country bands of note would be, when I first moved to Nashville, Tanya Tucker for several years as front of house and production manager, Sarah Evans, Kelly Coffey, toured many years with Big and Rich, 9 years actually, total. And during that time, sort of transitioned over to some more pop and rock acts. I did a tour with Journey. I mixed One Republic's First World Tour back in 2008. Wow, it seems like it was only yesterday. And Alan Parsons of the Alan Parsons Project, and of course, the most famous is Your Studio. Students might recognize as an iconic and legendary producer and engineer and an artist in his own right. I mixed his live touring show around the world, the Alan Parsons Live Project, for about 4 years. And just keep doing what I love.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm afraid you may be a tough person to follow, but Scoop, you're up next.
Well, yeah, I mean, we all pale in comparison to Martin. My name is Brett Blandon. Everybody calls me Scoop on the road. Studio guys still call me Brett often in the studio. I originally from Tampa, Florida, went to college in Boston. I'm a Berkeley guy. I moved here to Nashville in 96. worked for Masterphonics and went on to manage Ocean Way. Was a studio guy for many years, even started my own small studio on the row for many years as a jingle house. Moved on to Live Sound, I guess, in '99. Worked with a various bunch of artists: Brad Martin, Shadazy, Tracy Bird, and most notably lately Lady Antebellum for, I guess, the last 12 years. So it's been a pretty good spread. I still have Brett's Place Productions studio here and Brett's Place Live, which is a small sound and light company. I like to take in kids that want to grow and develop and learn how to work with clients and artists and gain some real world training in real time. I don't think there's any more valuable way to progress than that. So I really thoroughly enjoy class opportunities like this and taking folks in and sharing what I know. And also, much like Martin, going to school constantly and growing and continuing to learn also from a student base as well.
Awesome. Scott, you're up next.
Well, let's see. As far as the live sound thing goes and how I got my start, I was in a band a long time ago, and I was very unhappy with how a lot of the things were sounding from the performer side of things. So started to learn through blunt force and repetition, and got an opportunity towards the end of that to buy a recording studio, and figured out real quick that that was a thing that required some nuance, and I needed to learn how to run it. And that was an interesting proposition because it got me directly in contact with the University of Tennessee, and I started to teach as an adjunct there. This was quite some time ago, but I took over for a professor who was on sabbatical for a couple semesters and got my feet wet in the university industry as a teacher. And during that time frame, also was approached by Waves to start an education endeavor for them, which ended up in a lot of collaboration with all the schools, including SAE. Chris Davey was my guy that I would talk to a million years ago. And there was a long, probably still going on collaboration between Waves and SAE. So through all of that, I ended up moving to Nashville and went, instead of working for a manufacturer, I went to work for a couple of live and corporate production companies. And mainly on the project management and the sales side of the organization, just to get the shows happening, but then also to manage those specific client relationships as were needed. And current state of affairs is we're working on some seriously interesting remote production possibilities that are real time and very timely right now.
Right. Sounds like it. Wow. Okay, cool. Thanks, Scott. Matt, you're up next. Matt, if you want to unmute yourself. Actually, I think I can.
He might be frozen.
Yeah, he may be. Okay, we're going to skip Matt and come back once he's unfrozen. Let's see who else we have. Harold, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Harold LaRue, and like many, I got started in live sound by being in bands, and just sort of gravitated toward the technology. Really enjoyed that, and at the same time, sort of took up studio production techniques as well. So I kind of have a foot in both worlds, and I still do some of that now. I learned the theatrical sound trade. So that's where most of my live sound work is these days, doing union theatrical work for several theaters here in Houston now. And I'm part of the education committee for my union as well. So I do, I help to spread the word that way. And I also teach at some, have taught at universities and recording schools around the country as well, both recording techniques and some live sound. So these days, I'm running a full-time mastering studio, home-based studio, and I also still do union theatrical work as well here. So that could be as it's pretty wide range of work, including the symphony, the opera, the ballet, but also any number of Broadway shows that might come in, or musical acts that show up at the theaters. We sort of get everything doing that. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to dig in any deeper.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll dig deeper as we go.
Okay.
And welcome back. Harold was with us previously. Another face I'm glad to see back is Kevin Edlin. Kevin, talk to us just a little bit about your background.
Hi, Kevin.
I think you're muted.
There we go. Sorry, doing this on my phone. Yeah, thanks. It's great to be back. I got in the music business to make rock and roll records, and I have worked on rock and pop and country and everything else. But I've ended up making more classical albums than anything else. So I've done like 23 or 24 albums with the National Symphony here, and a ton of small chamber orchestra stuff and chamber groups here and all over the country. And I've also mixed front of house for some national acts, and at lots of big and small venues all over town here, and toured all over the US and Europe, mixing front of house and monitors sometimes. And I've also played guitar in bands, and started out in my own bands, and then ended up doing some gigs as a hired guitar player, and ended up doing like some band leader gigs, and touring all over doing that, making sure that the new drummer was playing the right groove, and the bass player had the latest charts or whatever. So, and I don't do as much of that now. I still do some live sound, but mostly make records these days, and happy to be doing it.
Awesome. Is Matt still on here? Looks like we may have lost him. We'll come back to Matt when he rejoins us. And is Crash on here?
Yeah.
Do not see him.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have a few stragglers popping in shortly, but let's go ahead and get started with the discussion here. Some of you guys sort of got into this a little bit with your intros, but something I just want to kind of get started with is kind of why you chose live sound, how you got into live sound, and why you choose to stay. And you guys can take these in any order, whoever's got some.
You want to pick us out? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Bart. You want to pick us out? It might be easier than waiting on that, given how many people we have on the panel. If you want to throw us a question,
Sure.
here and there, it might actually move the show a little quicker. But yeah,
Sure.
Go ahead, Martin.
Well, like a lot of the fellows here, I too originally started off playing instruments, which I still do to this day. But for some odd reason, very early on, I was very much drawn to the technical side of things. Here were all these microphones plugged into mixers, which of course were all analog back then. And at one point, I just made that decision and realized that my calling was to be behind a console, not behind a microphone or in front of an amplifier on a stage, as it were. That's the path that I took. What keeps me interested certainly is the growth and the learning of new technology, new methods, constantly moving forward and striving to embrace and utilize those techniques and technologies in the field to make the best possible and listening result for paying patrons in the audience at live events. And quite frankly, where that goes to is at the front of house mix position, which technically I am somewhat bitextual. I will mix monitors as well, both either wedges and or in-ears, but I'm primarily a front of house engineer. And that moment when the lights come down, the first note is struck, and the audience goes wild is not only mesmerizing for the people in the audience as it is for the entertainers on stage, but it also really gets my blood flowing as well. There's nothing quite like the rush of the downbeat at a show when the band starts. And I think in many ways that's an emotional connection to, you know, reaction of the audience from the band through the music. And in a technical way, I'm that connection. And that's what still keeps the buzz for me going to this day.
Awesome. How about you, Scoop?
Well, I think it's kind of part what Martin said. I think something the older that I've gotten in the business, I think that something that is more apparent than ever is having a routine and how that sets up for that moment of go time that Martin was talking about. You know, there is a spiritual thing. I think that's very real. And there's a whole bunch of systems that have to go online and people that it takes, everybody's got to be kind of, turning exactly together and, just because I'm that guy, what do I have to lose? From my pre-show visit to the coffee pot and the John on the way to front of house, and the way that, set of events go through line check, through, changing of radio channels and checking in with the PM and going, we're good and everything's good, all the way down to snapshot go time. That's a lot of build, and it definitely takes some time to come down from after the show, but it's a team thing. I think you got to have a lot of trust for a lot of the other guys on your crew. You got to have a lot of trust for yourself, but you got to be vulnerable as well, and lean on the people in your crew, lean on the team members that really excel in different departments, and hopefully they inspire you to continue to learn and grow.
Awesome. Scott, how about you?
I'm going to need to hear the question again just to make.
Well, basically, what got you into live sound and what keeps you there?
Okay, so what got me in was an extreme amount of difficulty with what was happening on the stage. And it wouldn't have stayed that way for very long if I had just not gotten involved. But the thing what kept me involved is I was already very into like critical listening of music and had studied at a conservatory level how to play instruments. And so to bridge those two and to be on the not always creative, but sometimes creative side, and sometimes it's the mixing side, and sometimes it's just making sure that the people have the tools to do their job side. And then the other times it's the organizing of the people to make sure that the project actually happens, or happens in the way that honors the art and the craft of all of the people that are involved. It's all of those parts, because when you go back and sit and listen to something, for example, like Audible's James Taylor project that just got given away for free last week, that's a phenomenal piece of work that explains a lot about how he relates to his own work and his life and his music. And just how can you not be interested in all that stuff? It'd be really weird.
How about you, Kevin?
How did I get started in live sound, and why did I stay? Let's see. I think I got started because I think I had been laid off at a studio down on Music Row that almost went out of business, and just started doing anything I could do, and did some stagehand work at theater here, and then they had an orchestra in there, and I had a background in classical recording. So I knew where everybody sat and how it all worked. And I ended up getting called to just jump in, and I knew what mics should go where, and they just had me do it. And I learned from some people to mix front house for orchestras, how to do that. And because I already sort of knew my way around. And then there were also other bands that I had worked with that I would have done a record with them. And they would just like, hey, we have some dates to go, Mick. Can you come and engineer for us out on the road? And I was like, sure, yeah. And I had no idea how to do it, and just had to get out there and start learning how. But I was fortunate enough to work with some really great engineers that I would like be an A2 for, or second for, or even A3 for, or whatever, and just like really learn from them. So I didn't go to school to learn. I went to school to learn recording originally, but not live sound. I just ended up working with a lot of people who were really great and learning from them, and then just kept doing it and have been ever since, except for now.
Hey, it looks like Crash has joined us. Welcome.
Hola. How you guys doing?
Good. We got through introductions, kind of talking about how everyone got into live sound. Why don't you kind of catch us up to date with a little bit about yourself for those that haven't already met you 3 times?
Right. I am the production manager and typically do front of house at the Mercy Lounge Cannery Ballroom Complex. There's also a venue there called the High Watt and a private event space. So on a busy day, I have 4 stages going, but anywhere from 1 to 4 stages going, and a bunch of engineers that work for me. And I like the gig because I get to cherry pick the bands that I like. So that's fun. I try to stay at the calendar and cherry pick the ones that are fun to mix, or guys that are not traveling with a front of house guy, so I actually get to mix somebody instead of the 5-minute check before I do the kind of thing. I came up originally as a guitar player. I picked the wrong town to be a guitar player in. I think Nashville's pretty steep on the guitar player competition. I was very fortunate to play with some people that were signed when I was 18, 19, started guitar teching for people because that was an easy bridge, and then learned monitor engineering from some very, very good people that I looked up to, and then was doing both backline and monitor engineering, and have found my home doing front of house. And I really want to reiterate what Martin said. There is a magical, emotional, spiritual connection for me when I'm doing a mix that I like and enjoy. And those are the artists at this point in my career that I tend to go do my tours with. Something to be said about having a connection with your fingers on the faders, and the bands that I tour with at this point, I've told many of them that I'm friends with, that you can tell whether I'm having a great time or a bad time, because if it's great, I'm dancing behind the console. So, and those are the gigs I try to keep, are the ones that make me inspired and make not that I want anybody looking at me, but I feel like I'm performing when I have a good mix and it's right. So, and I also want to definitely reiterate what Scoop said too. It's definitely a team effort. It takes a lot of elements coming together to make that show happen, especially at the bigger levels, and everybody's job has become more specific, which is super awesome. And it gives me an opportunity to learn some specialty stuff. So.
Awesome. Harold, I saw you smile when he mentioned dancing behind the console. Is that something you do?
I'll probably see me back there doing some air drums too, but if I know the tunes, yeah. So, Crash mentioned the performance aspect of mixing, and I think it's critical. You are a member of the band and the production, and it is a critical aspect of what's going on. And if you are grooving to it and you have an intimate knowledge of what's going on, then I think that helps to carry on, whether anybody's watching you or not. I think they're feeling you, and I think it comes across in your mix. But other than coming up in the bar scene and doing live sound, in the 80s, I was reintroduced to live sound later, after I took a job at a pro audio electronics shop. So I was part of a team of 5 techs fixing everything in town. All the production companies and recording studios and theaters and schools and churches were bringing all of their gear to come in and be repaired. And so I naturally built a rapport with these people in their groups. And one of my friends in the theaters struck up a conversation, and we were talking about live sound. And I'd mentioned some of my background in that. And so he asked me if I wanted to come and babysit a board for him and get involved a little more. And I did. I got introduced to the local union, signed up for the list there, and started picking up gigs as a stagehand, doing some light audio work, and learning there's so much involved in the theatrical trade, not all the terminology, all the equipment that's used. So I loved it. I got my blood boiling. I loved the team effort, as several people have mentioned at this point. I love being part of a well-oiled machine, and being part of the entertainment industry too. When I walk out on any stage, it's just magical, and and I don't. And even before anybody's there, when those trucks roll up to the loading dock and you start pushing boxes into place, I just get excited by it. It's fun. It's fun. So that's what drew me back into it, and what keeps me there. And so again, I love having one foot in each of those worlds. I spend most of my time in a mastering studio by myself, no clients, no bands around. So it's just me here. But then I get to go and work in beautiful sounding spaces with excellent artists, and be a part of a team, and my ears get to be refreshed again. I can take what an orchestra or a choir or a band sounds like in a big live space, and bring that back to the studio, and it just kind of resets my brain, and I get to mix and master in a different way, and it just kind of refreshes me. So I get a lot of excitement and just re-energized. I get re-energized by that live sound experience too, and get to be around other human beings. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. I think we have gotten to everyone that made it onto the call. Crash, are we missing anybody else that's going to make it?
Bailey and Mount Jones were trying to get on.
Matt was here and then he dropped off. I haven't
seen.
His
internet connection went, and Chris Bailey said he was trying to get on.
I got you. Okay, we'll get to him. Oh, there he is. Hey, Chris. Hey, Chris. Go ahead and unmute yourself. We're just kind of getting through introductions and a little bit about your background, how you got into live sound. Why don't you go ahead and take a stab?
I've been in Nashville about 10, 15 years, and got started kind of cutting my teeth at the honky tonks downtown. And from there, went to Mercy Lounge and was there for a long while, still there sometimes, and been touring steady for about the past 10 years, probably.
All right. Awesome. So really this time we were hoping to make this a little bit more of an interactive discussion amongst our panelists, since we have so many of you. And I talked to Crash and asked him to prep you guys, see if you guys can come up with some questions of your own, either for individual panelists or for the group. Martin, how about we start with you? What are some of the discussion points, some things you would be interested in talking to the panel about today?
Well, I think one thing which in this era is certainly relevant is the importance of absolutely keeping up with technology. But certainly for the last almost 2 decades, it's been speeding ahead at an exponential rate. The more memory they can stick onto a chip, the more things become available to your fingertips. I think it's one thing I'd like to tell everybody about is the importance of realizing that nowadays, being a live sound engineer is very much not even necessarily close to being a single job anymore. And that is to say that if you're a mix engineer and you're mixing a live band, whether it be at monitors or front of house, there's so many other things these days that we have to be responsible for, and that's directly relative to the evolution of technology. I'll try to go through the list that I have that I can think of off the top of my head. One thing for sure, if you're a live sound engineer, you're absolutely now also a recording engineer. There was a time not too long ago when recording engineers were recording engineers and live sound guys were live sound guys, and it was 2 separate things. But now you have to, at the very least, capture a left-right bus for archival purposes, but most of the time, which is pretty much the norm nowadays, is multi-tracking every single show. And let's take that a step further. You may even be required to, down the line, mix that multi-track for other purposes and not directly necessarily related to the show itself. And I'm going to take that one step further, which came up recently in another forum I participated in, and that is live streaming. Live streaming has been in the industry for a while, but I think now more than ever, it's going to come virtually to the point where we're required to provide feeds for a live stream that's going to go out to potentially a much, much bigger audience. There are other technologies involved upstream from your feed. So there's another set of technical parameters we have to be absolutely aware of in order to provide the best possible listening result for the online audience that's not even on the venue or inside of the venue. Another one of those things is that you may also be required to wear more than one hat, and that is it's quite commonplace these days for any sound engineer or even lighting engineers for that matter to wear multiple hats of employment. That is, I'm the front of house guy and I'm also the production manager. The production manager advances all aspects of a tour for every single venue, for every single show throughout the year, no matter how long or short that is. Everything from bus parking on site, truck parking, catering, labor inside the venue, sound production, lighting production, video production, providing a schedule for the entire day just for the one show. And that includes everything that happens on site related to the production. It's a big hat. It's a lot of information to process, and then still perform your normal audio duties, as in tweaking a sound system, sound checking, getting ready for the show, mixing the show, recording it simultaneously, perhaps providing a live stream simultaneously. And as soon as it's all over and you've saved everything and double checked to make sure your hard drives are all working, it's time to put back on your production manager hat and do everything again in reverse. So that's a lot of things to consider. And one thing I left out as well is we're also very much need to be to some degree at the least as an IT person, because we have so many different types of interconnection for moving digital information, whether it's audio over Ethernet, audio over AES, audio through light pipe, which is fiber optic. So there's a great deal more that a modern live sound engineer has to both know and at the very least be aware of and somewhat educated in, in order to succeed and be viable in the marketplace. And you got to be a good engineer. That's the most important, of course.
It's a lot of hats you have to wear. Scoop, talk to us just a little bit about some of the discussion points you might have. Now, he mentioned something I thought was interesting, which is live streaming events, and I guess that's really been going on for a while. But I guess there's probably going to be a renewed interest in that at this point.
I'm going to loop back in at the end of that about live streaming because I feel like it ties in a couple bullet points that are very resonant with what Martin said. Is number one, I'd say do your homework. If that's you're a PM or you're an engineer and whatever, but man, I hated doing homework as a student. Like literally was trying to find every way that I could to get out of it. And at this stage of life, there is no more important factor in the entire process than doing your homework if for nothing else, a stress management perspective. make yourself a checklist of things that you need to know about every gig. Help bands make input lists and stage plots because they don't get it and they don't understand the value of that. And that stuff is invaluable, not only to the one guy on deck trying to do everything, but to the party of 10 guys on deck trying to do everything. So anyway, do your homework, I'd have to say. Point number 2 for me, I think that Sal Greco told me years ago. He said, frequencies are notes. I think when we remember that, it explains a whole lot of things from time and phase to tonality and resonance, things like that. In the scholastic process and even developing beyond, note 3 that I would say is continue to make your IT flight path a focus. Martin kind of alluded to that already, but the minute that we become that audio purist that many of us started out being, the more we lose sight of our own evolution opportunities moving forward. So IT is definitely an increasing opportunity. Don't ever forget gain staging. Just because we've got all this gear these days with really low noise floors, it is never, Kevin, I'm sure you've got everything to say about that. But yeah, gain staging and signal flow is still at the top of my food chain as well. And whether you're a monitor engineer or a front of house engineer or a venue owner or a backline tech or an artist, be mindful of stage volume. There is somebody in the front row. And if it's an orchestra date, if it's a, Marshall stack date, man, if you're putting a rock band on the stage at the Sydney Opera House, you got to know all of the parts of that thing. That room wasn't built for that, and things to be mindful of. So all of that kind of ties into, in my opinion, streaming. There's a lot of time these days that I'm not getting a broadcast truck sent to my shows because I've got my desk and my world built, and I'm a competent broadcast engineer as well. Some of the artists and clients that I work for are lobbying out of that expense because for the scope of the live stream they're trying to accomplish, they can ask me more than 5 minutes before the show starts for a feed to be faxed to them and things to be checked out. And there is more of that stuff going on. Be mindful of compression. Definitely be mindful of compression in the world of broadcast. When your compressor and limiter is set too high, or you're trying to have too much makeup gain for broadcast, just realize that when that source material is vacant, you're just drinking up the room and shipping it. So, I think that's the most common thing I see in the live streaming department. Get hip to RTMP servers and distribution and how ATIs and APIs are processing your audio signal on the back end. Facebook, hey, is my signal really coming out mono or stereo, or are you flipping a coin and seeing what you get today? If that's a reality, which it is, it's really important to have that phase scope up and check it on your way down that stereo output stream to make sure there's nothing that's vaporizing downstream of you because you've got a really unmanaged stream, or one that's really subject to robot involvement with, if you will. That's kind of my 2 cents about streaming at this point.
Scott, you have anything to add to that?
To that point, there's a cute little button at the top left-hand corner of Zoom in most people's cases that says turn on or turn off original sound. And that will either let it continue to sound horrible or let it sound a lot better than it used to. So Zoom and all of the buckets, like you got to know what your bucket is in terms of your streaming platform or your broadcast platform and what are its strengths and weaknesses. Not picking on Zoom. Zoom's easy. It works great. It lets us do stuff like this with very little drama from the end user. And it manages things like full and half duplex communication pretty well because I'm coming in one thing and coming out the other in terms of how my computer and my rig is set up, and everything sounds good and looks pretty good. Would I do critical listening through it? No, not ever. But I would use it as a reference for perhaps content of a performance, not necessarily fidelity of a performance, but content, yeah. Obviously, in that case, you'd want something different recording locally. But these are different broadcast situations where, like, today's needs are dictating a whole lot more attention to be spent in different ways as compared to the one guy holding up his iPhone and playing the piano on national TV, because the consumer is telling us that. And so if we're audio engineers or engineers at all, with audio specificity, the things to pay attention to are what are the consumers like actually telling us they want? And they want better audio that is in sync and in time with the best video possible. But usually audio is what people hang a broadcast on, no matter what they say. It's still got to sound good. So that's my 2 cents for today's little broadcast nugget.
Crash, talk to us about streaming events. You have a lot of involvement with that?
I've done a handful of streaming events. We had my previous gig was at a place called Acme Feed and Seed there on First and Broadway, right in downtown. We did a series with Wrangler as the sponsor. That Wrangler, we did an event there where Wrangler would pay for our artist budget, and we would stream that live to Wrangler for them on their website. And it was a cool thing. We'd have 10,000 people watching online. Typically, what I was doing with that was, which oddly enough was with a pair of X32s, was I was doing monitors in front of house off my console, and then using a Cat5 backbone that was going back to the radio station, and he was doing the broadcast mix off of my gain share, but then had separate EQs, so he could actually be in an isolated room and do that and spitting that back to video for to go out of broadcast out, which took away my room EQs and room reverbs and stuff that I was using for the live show, because what the broadcast needs and what the live show needs are two different things. I'm gonna credit Scoop with this because I took this play from his playbook. We did a gig together a couple of years ago, and he was sending his left right to a matrix and doing his 31 band EQ on that matrix for the live feed. But that way another matrix didn't have the 31 band for broadcast out, so we weren't cutting stuff out of the broadcast. It was really just a standing wave in the performance area, and that helped out a lot. I would highly recommend for our guys that are getting started to at least do your 2-mix or your multi-tracks, if for nothing else, just for yourself to keep you honest. But what people were saying about over compressing and that stuff, like you don't hear it in the room near as much as you do on your broadcast or your straight left, right out. And that stuff will keep you honest. I do want to reiterate the IT aspect. I've had to learn more about network routing for wireless devices, more about RF coordination, and more about just Cat5 fiber backbone stuff, and how systems administration stuff works. I've been PM, front of house, TM on a bunch of the gigs that I'm on, and the devil's the advance is half the day. Like getting the advance done for my show, so I know what I'm walking into, so I can see pictures of what I'm doing, what I'm walking into if I haven't been there, to make sure that we have everything on site that we're not bringing ourselves, is a big deal. And I think it's made me a little easier to work with because I've been on both sides of that fence, where I've been the house guy that's got a touring guy coming in, and I've seen his advance, and it's made my advances better for sure, for when I'm going out and doing dates.
How about you, Chris?
For the live stream, I actually don't have a ton of experience with that. We use a company called Nugs, I believe, that they'll come out and do some live shows for us. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those where I just they do their own thing and kind of deal with the front of house, and I'm the monitor end. But for Mule, we use I have a Joco 64 like black box recorder that I multi-track every single day, and get it shipped out. That try to do it that night to our archivist, because it's one of those, like, we release every show, it's multi-track, we release it online. The faster you can get that done, the more you're going to sell. You think about we just did this show, the next day is like, oh, I'd like to buy that show. They can go online and buy it right then and there. It's, you're going to sell a lot more of those instead of a week later it being available and somebody's already forgotten about what they just experienced. as far as the streaming aspect of it, I don't have a lot of expertise with that.
Hey,
How about
Chris,
you,
real
Harold?
quick. Well, let me ask you a question. Well, before we get off of you, so you're uploading your multi-tracks every night to your archivist, and that's being remixed and then available for sale, or they're shipping your 2-mix for sale via the stream. How's that process work with your
No,
camp?
it's an actual multi-track that we upload into. We have a Google Drive. We sit there and kind of. It's one of those. I literally, it's the first before the loadout even really starts. I'm grabbing that multi-track and handing that SD card and handing it off to our tour manager. He starts uploading it right there. Especially for the venue with good Wi-Fi and everything, you try to do it right then and there. Our archivist has like a template in Pro Tools that he'll use and kind of just pop that in. It's one of those. Try to do it as fast as possible to get it out there. But I do a 2-mix as well that comes from front of house, but it's more like a backup. It's like a safety thing, you know.
Cool. Hey, Kevin, do you guys live stream with the orchestra? And also, I think they mentioned something about gain staging. You might want to speak to.
Well, I don't work with the orchestra here full time. I've just freelanced for them a lot, and they have not been doing that. But I do a lot of recording and mixing at Vanderbilt Polaris School of Music, and there we do live stream every event. But this is all classical music, so I don't typically put any compression on the mix, and it's the exact same. It's more usually that's more of an archive mix for the students and the faculty, but it goes out live at the same time, and I'm not like doing any compression on it at all, or any limiting. So for that, there's a large church here that also do their broadcast mix, but there's a totally separate split. There's a front of house and monitor split, and a third one too, a broadcast room that's got a small little mini studio in it, and they have the Waze TL1 system there, and and it's a whole separate mix that goes out to a company called Pixel that distributes it like everywhere. And gain staging, that's just, I can't say it any better than Scoop did. It matters no matter what you're doing. It matters all the time, every time.
Harold, do you have anything to add?
I don't really have anything more to add as far as the streaming goes, but to go back to the topic of recording, a Joko recorder was mentioned, and I think it's important to say that when you're setting up a multi-track recording or any sort of recording rig, that you go for the most reliable, fail-safe solution possible. So just bringing your laptop along, not having it tuned, not having it locked down, not having it tested in a live sound scenario, that can nip you, that can get you in trouble later if for some reason if it happens to be an older system and still has a spinning hard drive in it. Some of them have shock protectors in there. Probably you'll find that less and less now, but some of these subwoofers can get pretty seismic, and can rattle some of these laptops with hard drives, and it'll stop your recording in the middle of it. And found that out the hard way.
That's a good tip.
The first and last time I ever did that. So I started going to more reliable memory stick based SSD style drives, and that Joko recorder is among the best sort of solid state multi-track recorders. So I just want to reiterate how important it is to have a really solid solution, because as you said, if that show is going out that night to be mixed, to be sold, you've lost revenue opportunity there as well, due to a technical error. So you don't want to be that person.
Well, that's actually a really good transition to the next question that I had, and I'm going to go straight down the line with you guys. Do you remember a specific experience where you wish you had done something differently? And if so, what would you change? And hopefully this is something that our students can learn from. So we'll start with Martin.
Wow, that's a tough question.
Can we limit the scope of our responses? Like, is
Yeah,
this,
because my goodness, I mean, there's so many different ways I could potentially answer that question. Um,
It has to be
well,
entertaining. We'll say that.
okay, going back historically, I can think of one thing, and you guys will probably get a chuckle out of this, at least some of you. Um, when the iPod first became widely popular, I wasn't immediately hip off the bat to the seriousness of the difference in audio quality between a straight MP3 file and a Waves file until one day it was made apparently clear to me, and thereafter absolutely dumped and have never since personally owned unless it was provided by a client, attempted to put MP3 files through a sound system for a professional performance. And the big difference there is in audio quality alone. With an MP3 file, which of course is compressed, you'll have a difference in everything, really. I guess, Scoop, you could back me up on this, both frequency response and dynamic range. So that was something, but fortunately, somebody pointed it out to me very early on, and when that light went off, it stayed on afterwards. Yeah.
How about you, Scoop?
so to what Martin said, yeah, I mean, don't tune in your system with an MP3. To this day, I still request a CD player because I'm old school, even though they're becoming more or less and less frequent and available. But I try to suffer the least amount of conversion issues, and what's coming out of my desk, I want that to be as close to what's coming out of that CD player in time and technology and tone. Also realize that if you're not playing out of an iPod or your phone, that what's coming out of any Apple device is definitely suffering a whole bunch of garbage on the input side and output side, and just be mindful of that. The more mindful you are, the more cleaner you can consider your flight path on the front end. Things that I wish I would have done different. So always have a backup. In the world of digital consoles, I'll just speak for my year this last year. I was mixing on an S6L, and it was the last night of a second residency in Las Vegas. I'm running an external wave server, doing some moderate plugins. I'm also recording multi-track to Pro Tools, inclusive of a stereo mix from me. I'm shipping it out over the PA as well. And at some point, 3-4 songs into the show, the console quit passing audio, and the screens began to go away until about 12-13 seconds later it said waiting or looking for engine. It's kind of like driving down the freeway at 100 miles an hour and everything turns off in your car, your power steering and your brakes quit working, and your message that comes up on your on-screen display in your car says looking for engine. This is really, or better off, looking for brakes. So anyway, what we did have available, but it was not patched, because I was my SE that time, was we always have our monitor engineer, Peter Bowman, ship a extra mix out of his desk to front of house, that if my console dumps, I can push the button, and if his console dumps, he gets one of those from me that's an instant inject into all the in-ears on deck. So that stuff we usually, temper our gain stage and make sure that we're on the same page. Anyway, that day, it took about 2.5 minutes to get that connection patched. And it was I lost a lot of hair that day. Realistically saying, look, make sure you think through your flight path. It's a general rule in tour that I've got a mix switch or an AES switch or some opportunity that if any part of the food chain, especially show critical food chain, goes down, that it's a backup. If you've got a UPS or battery backups that you're using, man, don't put your monitors, like your near field monitors or your video screens of non-critical show items, on your backup UPS. You buy yourself more time and you don't know when you're going to need it. but you will need it one day. And the day you need it's going to be the day the SE didn't patch it. Anyhow, follow through, have backup plans, have a good plan with your crew. If and when this happens, what's next? Oh, hey, I couldn't get a hold of my monitor engineer because Clearcom's operating on the MADI line or the OptiCore line between the consoles. Note to self, Clearcom should always be on a piece of copper that is not suffering the integration of a console. Just kinds of things like that. And I know we'll probably say this at the end. I am at Brett's Place Productions on Insta. So if any of you guys want to send me a DM at any point and ask me any, or likely we're all on this page, I try to field a couple questions, a couple different people a week. I love to give back. So feel free to send me a message and ask me more thorough questions. I'll give you more thorough answers.
Awesome. And yes, we'll definitely come back to that at the end. And if anyone wants to throw up their information on the chat function there, that would be a good place for you guys to throw up any contact information that you'd like to share. Scott, did you have a story to share?
I mean, it's more of a process because the stories there are too many, and each one of them provided a unique learning experience that speaks to a process, and it's a process that Martin and Scoop and everybody else are probably well familiar with, and that's you basically try and prep for every conceivable problem, even down to the point where somebody hits a transformer at street level. And, your client's going to let you know whether it's important enough or their event is important enough or their live stream that goes out to 60 million viewers is important enough. So whether you need to address that situation when it's brought up ahead of time, not when your pants are on fire and not when there's an arena or a live stream full of thousands, if not millions or tens of millions of people. So all that to say, prepare, and then as a committee of your peers and the people that you're working with, hopefully that's more than one person at a time. But if it's one person at a time, give it some distance and look at it from a different perspective and see if there are ways that you can make sure that whatever those problems that you anticipate happen, that you've got one or two elegant ways to get out of it to where the audience is none the wiser.
I like that. Crash, how about you? Anything you want to add? Any instances, things that have popped up that you think we could learn from?
Oh, well, they say the wise man learns from other people's mistakes. And being as a house guy, I've helped quite a few tours help troubleshoot their stuff. So I've tried to prep what I'm taking out from other people's experiences. And a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is medium, smaller scale, 3,000 to 5,000 cap venues, that kind of stuff. So we're limited on what we're carrying. But yeah, always have a backup, always have an emergency plan, always have a separate, every time I put out a wireless, I put out a hardwired spare unless I've got a second wireless. But even at that, I like having a hardwire spare, and copper doesn't fail near as much as network connections do. So I will totally reiterate that. However, I don't have the time to pull copper for everything that I do. And a lot of the times that I'm doing things, there's not enough hands to pull all the copper that I want. So we're on, a Cat 6 snake or an optic snake. But yeah, having comm on copper is amazing. And the fail safe is there. A lot of times I don't have the budget to have all the backup systems in place that I would like to have in place. So a lot of that's also just testing my show. I line check everything before my artist ever gets up, so they don't ever have to see me look and patch a cable. By the time hopefully I've built enough time in that I can make sure that my efforts are facilitating my artist making art. There was a band that I toured with for a while, a year and a half ago, Robert Randolph and the Family Band, and those guys didn't want to sound check ever. But they did want to get up and work on their new song. So we, our job was to facilitate our artist making art. It wasn't 100% about the show. Some of that was about making sure that we had writing time for them during sound check so they could figure out arrangements and work on a new piece and that kind of stuff. Our show, we had a lot of guests on that tour. I had, I think, 8 channels of guest lines always for that tour. So a lot of times what would be sound check ended up being working out what the guest appearance was during the show. Which brings us back to the multi-track and doing virtual sound check. And that saved me a lot of times in a lot of venues, is being able to pull the multi-track from the night before up and at least pump that through the system, so I know what I've got coming down the lines as a good starting point. And that's all I got on that.
Cool. Hey, Kevin, you got any specific experiences where you wish you'd done something differently we could learn from? I think you're muted there. There we go.
It's hard to. I've made so many mistakes. It's hard to pick the best one. Where do I start? Back everything up. Make everything bulletproof. Where if there's anything that can go wrong, figure out a way. Figure out what you would never think would be able to go wrong, and figure out a way to have that ready to go for when it will probably happen, which is when it's the worst time for it to happen. I mean, back up every show file in multiple places and have multiple copies on it. Let's see, hardwired spares. That has saved me so many times on big shows and little ones, or any backup of any of what's the most important mic. I'll tell you this. When tearing down, I will, and there's a large like outdoor event or something, I will leave one mic line, or especially any kind of theater thing, I'll leave one mic line open for people to make announcements with, and that's either on the stage and one at the console where I'm at, so that if anybody needs to make an announcement at the last minute, somebody can. I've had somebody pass out from the heat at Vanderbilt's graduation, and we needed to find like an emergency medical tech. Like, is there a doctor in the house? Like, it happened right at that moment, and we had to get their family members like right there. And having one mic that was open to the last minute as long as possible, like, helped make that situation not nearly as bad as it could have been.
Wow. Wow. Harold, you got anything? I think you're muted. There we go.
There we go. Yeah, I certainly certainly mentioned that that recording snafu, but again, to Kevin's and others' points, having a microphone nearby that's going to be live, or that you can, or even just having a 58 next to the console that you can run out to a line that's not working or not passing audio, just pop a 58 on it, bang away, and see if you get signal up at the board. It's muted. Just emergency measures like that, are really handy. Having spare XLR cables nearby near the stage that you can run out. But cool. You're going to learn really quickly. Your first few gigs, you're gonna put a laundry list of your own together very quickly, and not forgetting these experiences and taking them to your next show is how you learn how you become a professional.
Chris, how about you?
One particular mistake that sticks out is years ago I came from mainly doing front of house and got hired to do monitors for a band that was coming into Bonnaroo. They were huge, jazz funk band, maybe 10 people in the whole band. And I learned real quick then about pinking out your mixes. And to definitely do it, you trust the stage, patch guy, normally everything works out fine, but didn't pink out my mixes. It's Bonnaroo, there's quick changeovers, you go real quick. And the DJ was getting the drum mix and the drum mix, vice versa. And, kept making changes, not realizing my two mixes were separated there. So that day I learned very quickly, always pink out your mixes. I don't care what show I'm doing, what I'm doing on deck. Every single show, I pink out my mixes.
Awesome. Well, having so many panelists today is making this go a little bit longer than we would typically take. But I want to do a couple quick rounds. Let's do some speed rounds here real quick. All right. This was one that was fun last week, and it was your favorite lead vocal microphone. Talk gear for just a moment. So if you could pick one mic, lead vocals, live sound situation. All right. Get it in mind. All right. Martin, go.
All right. Well, there's a whole lot of answers to that one, but at the end of the day, I think a good old-fashioned name brand dynamic microphone is a very good place to start, and that could be from any number of the major brands. I'll just throw Shure SM58 out there. It's not the greatest microphone in the world. It only costs $100, but by golly, you can hammer nails and break concrete with it and still plug it in, and it's absolutely going to work 9.75 times out of 10.
Scoop, lead vocal microphone. What do you think?
Wow, Martin, you're so diplomatic.
Somebody's got to say
yeah, I will actually say to this, it's whatever the artist wants. It's probably the right answer to that. I am inclined to, similar to Martin, lean on a quality name brand, E935 or SM58. I feel like those are very comparable products, robust products, time-tested and true products. I'm not sure that I would use them in my home construction project, but I definitely think that they're super value Swiss Army knives. And if I was on a desert island and I had to do a live vocal, it would likely be one of those two for starters. Yeah.
Cool. Scott, what do you think? If you're
Really
picking the mic, what are you going to pick?
It depends on the person talking through it. And it depends on how that mic makes that person feel. And sometimes that person doesn't necessarily know that the thing that you're about to hand them might make them feel awesome. And every once in a while, there's a specific artist I had in mind where I had a little bag of tricks in my Pelican that had all the bayonet tops to whatever. So we just rolled through them, and he picked one that was close to what I was going to pick for him, but it ended up being a DPA top for, the Shure stick system. But yeah, it's really whatever makes the artist feel comfortable on stage, and their performance will reflect that.
Kevin, how about you?
Let's see. I would also have to say a 58 and the 835. One or the other usually works for most people, most applications. And I think if you're touring at like a smaller, like a club level where you're just going to go in there, you're not even bringing a console. You're just going to go in there with a band you're with, and maybe there's just a house engineer, or maybe it's just and you have to use whatever there is. You're certainly not bringing monitors along with you that you're going to ring out, or there's no in-ears. Then I think probably most clubs in America are probably rung out for a 58. So if you're touring on something else. Like I was out with an act, and there's a local company here called Mic Tech, and they had given us some handheld vocal mics to try out on a tour, and they worked really well. But I made sure the artist brought a 58 just in case, because something didn't happen in a wedge, and there was nobody there to deal with it at the time, or no monitor engineer. And if I was mixing front of house, and actually on that tour I was playing guitar, so I couldn't have stopped and dealt with a feedback problem because I was like playing metal guitar riffs. So I made sure that we had a 58, that if this mic tag somehow just didn't sound right or just didn't work, like I wasn't able to go fix it, like we could just switch it out with a 58 really quick, and that would work. So those are I would say the 835 and 57 for sure. 58 for sure. But the mic tech was pretty good. And I've also mixed monitors for a national active, pretty famous singer, and he wanted to use what's the model number of the Shure is like a condensed handheld stage a vocal condenser mic, and either that or a Beta 57 as a backup. And those, like, I mostly hate those mics, and I didn't think that they were going to work at all, because this was with a loud rock band, and it turns out he knew that was that his voice sounded amazing on those, and what he did made those mics work amazing, where I would never have thought, like I would have used that condenser on a jazz singer in a small, quiet environment, and this is a loud rock band. I didn't think it was going to work at all. Turns out it worked amazing because it was him, because it worked for him. I don't think it would have worked for many other people, but it worked for him.
Harold, Crash, you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of that SM58. I also like the fact that you can find replacement windscreens for it pretty much anywhere, and especially now and in the coming months, taking those windscreens off and being able to run them through a dishwasher is going to be a really good thing to do more often than maybe we have been in the past. And I'm also a fan of the Shure KSM9 condenser capsule on a wireless handheld mic too, depending on the performer. But good old 58, again, you can hammer a nail in, in with it if you need to. But I think somebody else made a great comment that a lot of houses and monitor rigs are wrung out for a 58 too. So it's great. I also like the EV Endyme series too. They sound really good straight out of the box.
Crash, do you have anything to add?
I don't remember what the model number of that EV is. I think it's the series that Harold was referring to, but it's got the front flat grill. I like that for hip hop artists that want to cup the mic a lot. I like that for a lot of guys that do rapping and cupping the mic, but a lot of that depends on whether it's ears or whether it's a wedge. For me, I like being able to have the Shure stick, and if I have the time and availability to be able to swap out different capsules on that wireless stick. For me, one of the ones that sticks out is the Heil PR22, just because of the rejection pattern, especially if I've got a artist that is wanting to get out in front of the mains and stuff like that, or if I've got a catwalk kind of thing. The rejection on that is closer to a 57, but they can still get off to the side without it coloring it a whole lot. The 935 and the 58 are, the watermark of where I test everything. As far as, if I'm improving from that, there's a certain low mid scoop that seems to be apparent for me a lot of times on a 58, and it depends on what's coming back, that I don't seem to deal with as much with the 935. But I've also had people that want to bring in the beta or condenser mics, and end up having to high shelf it, and I'm like, I just made an SM out of this beta by what I did with EQ to get the hiss out of the wedges or whatever. But I do want to definitely reiterate having that 58 in your pocket or readily available, because I have so many people that want to look at me and say something's wrong on my end when there's something wrong on their pedal board or somewhere farther up the chain, and being able to have that and go 1, 2 through it and it be audible, and it go up the chain. I went through the same thing with Bela Fleck and Jimmy Strings 3 months ago, and Bela came in to sit in just on his banjo with a switcher on that, and we had just a few minutes to get a line check done for them, and he's not used to taking his own instruments. He's always got a guy with him, and this was him doing a favor, and nobody had changed the 9 volts out on his banjo, or either 2 of his banjos, for a minute, and we spent a minute doing that, and it was literally that little game of mental chess where he's like, dude, your system's not working. And I literally did the 58 in front of that and happened to find 2 9 volts that I had in my backpack with caps on them, just because I carry spares for as much stuff as I can. But we went through, and I've actually been playing with the multi-track of that since I've been locked down, because great musicians and something archival to listen to. But yeah, definitely do that. Definitely pink your wedges. I pink everything that's going to have audio coming out of it. I try to do that every time, just to check. And one other thing I will say for guys that are going out, and try to set up your show files from board to board with your same workflow, whatever works for you. But I try to do my outputs the same: left, right, subfill, left, right, subfill delay, left, right, subfill delay, and the broadcast for cameras, because I have a guy that shows up 2 minutes before downbeat that wants a camera feed. So I try to always be prepared for those extra outputs and extra guest inputs if there's room on the snake.
Are there guys that show up more than 2 minutes before showtime that want a video feed asking for a friend?
Not that are video guys. Every video like 5 minutes before downbeat, right?
Always.
You just have to put a card next to the place where that feed happens with your Venmo and an unlock cost.
Right. There you go. There you go. Way to go, Scott. Figure out how to monetize that.
For those of you that may have joined us late, the instructor of this live sound class, Nick Hosford, has been teaching the class about X32s and giving them, a solid foundation on, getting started on live sound. Nick, I wanted to give you a moment to address the panel and see what questions you might have.
We did talk about before. Well, we've done a lot with the X32 edit software, and I realize that other consoles have that sort of software. And for someone who's new and starting out, pretty accessible, the X32. I mean, you could probably download the app and bring your laptop to Guitar Center and try out a scene. What would you suggest for someone that might have to work on consoles that maybe are less available, but there's always, I guess, when you start to move up, seems like there's a period of time where you're getting thrown in front of new boards all the time. And what would you suggest as a way to not be a deer in the headlight night after night?
I think Martin's muted, but I think he's trying to talk.
I'd like to answer that. I think one very important tool, short of getting hands-on time on the actual console surface, is offline editors. And every single console manufacturer, the major brands, all have free downloadable software that is an offline version of the console surface. Certainly, and I've done this many, many, many times over the years where I knew I was going somewhere that couldn't get the console I wanted, but they had brand X. And the first thing I did was download the manufacturer's offline editor, a PDF of the manual, and build my own show file so I had somewhere to start from. Some offline editors are better than others in as far as how the console is laid out and how it's going to set up when you actually stand in front of it and push faders. But generally, the most important thing, doing all your inputs and outputs, that is to label your consoles, program effects, do subgroups and VCA assignments, and your output assignments is all easily done using the offline editors. And it's an absolutely super valuable tool to get a head start on a new product, especially if you don't have any hands-on experience with it. And it certainly takes a lot of pressure off in the field when you show up. And when you have, it's one thing standing in front of an analog console where you could touch every single knob, but digital consoles don't work that way. So if you have an idea of how it's going to be laid out before you get there and actually even have a file for it, you're going to be so far ahead of the ball game. You're going to, how did James Brown say it? Let me jump back and kiss myself. It's well worth it.
I'll jump in if we're still on the same question. I think it's a super awesome question, by the way. First off, I'll say if there's any students, any of you guys that want to test your, put a tone up and listen through your signal flow on any X32 build, let me know. Reach out. I've got a bunch of desks here, and it's easy to flip one. You can definitely come over and check Gazinta to Gazzada. I think it's definitely important. If I'm on a Digico, if I'm on an SD5 or S6L or an X32, I tend to color code all of my stuff the same way. Matrices are always teal. Aux sends are always blue. Aux returns are always green. Inputs are always yellow. Monitor stuff that's buried that I don't want ever to hit the airwaves in broadcast or front of house are always red. If I'm doing an X32 console build and I'm doing front of house and monitors on the same desk, I try to set it up, if I'm lucky enough to have 16 inputs on the front end and 16 inputs as layer 2 as a monitor desk. So I would label the same inputs yellow on the surface and red on the second layer. So I know if I'm on that fader, I'm on the right console, if you will. I also think, most sound companies in town, Blackbird, I'm sure SAE has some opportunities like this, Spectrum Sound Image, there are, and Claire, with a little bit of front end stroking of management or whatever. If you've got a console file that you want to check out and you've got enough time to pre-plan, it's not like making somebody jump through hoops to get there. I feel like there is a person that you can get to at every company that would get you a little bit of shop time on air and let you check Gazinta to Gazata. I think that's important. I think everybody understands the value of that. Definitely embrace the editor files. And try to develop a system, because the more you develop your own system along the way, like I've got a template, I've got a start crash pad. Sorry, crash. I've got a start file for all of the desks that I get to see, except for PM7. That's where I'm moving this year to PM7. I have a start template file for every file or every console that I work on, regardless of band. It's maybe inputs and out, or maybe inputs aren't labeled, because that does change with act to act. But man, if you look at my matrix structure, the way I do bus returns, FX setups, delays, things, where they live, high pass filters, shelving EQs, being able to be access engaged, it's the same way on every platform that I'm on. And something I'll add to that I started last year that's been super effective is all of my console files for all of the different consoles I used to have on a different stick. Let's be real, I still do, and I have a little Pelican that keeps all of my sticks, in a box. However, I started putting everything on the cloud and organizing my show files by cloud, so that when I get a PM, my PM, a venue PM, if I've got an artist that I've not worked with regularly that I'm going to have to dive into and do a Hail Mary to get the show off the ground, I've got an easy just drag and drop off of my Dropbox option to give that local guy a template that he can go ahead and schedule Gazintas and Gazatas and test that round trip for, so that when I walk up, it's just point and shoot for me.
That's awesome. How about you, Scott?
Sure.
Well, my boat's a little different because I'm not worried about specific artists, but like others have said, the online or offline editors that are available online are really helpful. Every manufacturer has them, and in most cases, they'll actually run on multiple platforms and not just on a PC, which is really nice. If you can always try out Waves LV1 for, I want to say it's 7 days without really any restrictions, and it's pretty freaking powerful. And it gets the idea across and lets you set up bus structuring and all that kind of thing too. But mainly it's just figuring out what you're going to use and make sure you're familiar with it, and make sure that you have all of the potential platforms covered in terms of how you set up your world, because at the end of the day, it's your workflow just on a different set of stuff. So it doesn't matter if you show up and it's, a CalRec or a Digico or a Lavo or a DigiGrid system that has not very much I/O in front of you and a couple of touch screens. The workflow that's yours should be impacted as little as possible by that architecture change. And I mean, that's something that, we're exploring right now as we look towards figuring out how to let people work across distances. So it's one of those things where, like, if people are used to working in Pro Tools, they're probably going to align most well with the Avid workflows, but they're going to need to probably know some others too. And one of them has their own unique challenges and opportunities. Like if you're working on a Digico, start with a spreadsheet. It's going to be your best friend. Right, Scoop?
I think it's a spreadsheet everything, man. Everything's got a signal flow, and it comes back from schematics and system flow, man. Does there need to be a triangle there? Does there need to be a delta? Can we get rid of the delta? If so, like, how are we doing it? I mean, everybody here, the old school, is going to laugh, but I don't know how much, how involved the modern day school is of signal flow and resistors and summing amplifiers and things like that. But it's no different than mapping out where your console is going to live. Look, with all of the different transmission protocols and sample rate conversion, especially like in the world of Digico. Oh, so I'm giving the Symphony Hall, I'm giving you guys a split out of my stage rack. Well, the house is on a different sample rate or bit depth than front of house and or monitors. Where does that body live? You know what? That's important information for me to have, but before the tour starts a year earlier, so that when that system happens, when that need is down the road, man, I don't have to break my creative process that day. Oh yeah, we've got a macro for that, or this is where that source is, or here's the draggable template for that. But if you've got to reinvent that wheel on the fly, and I hear about that happening a lot in the world of sample rate conversion and digital split land, plan for as much of that stuff ahead of time as you can, so that you don't have to ask those questions later.
Guys, I'm afraid we're running out of time here, but I wanted to give the students a moment to engage with you guys, get some questions going. So let's see who's on here. So Patrick Davis, Ori, some of you students, let's get some questions going here. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity for you guys. And while we're getting some questions into the chat box there, I wanted to thank you guys once again for doing this. And this is a lot of talent for one discussion panel. And any of you guys that would be interested in coming back and doing your own seminar individually, we would love to have you. Just shoot me an email if any of you guys are interested in engaging with students anytime in the upcoming semester. As I mentioned before, this is the end of this semester. And we're happy to give them the opportunity to end it on a big note with such an outstanding panel of live sound engineers. I also want to take a second and thank Crash for putting this together. This guy has been a big help to us. He knows everybody in town, and I think we've got some folks on this call or on this Zoom from outside of Nashville as well. So let's see. We've got a few questions coming in here. In bar, who is that? Go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'll go ahead and let you ask your own question.
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm from New York. So yeah, I'm the STA school there. And I guess my question would be, I do have some live sound experience. Before I came to SAE, I did work for a sound crew at my old college. And that's where I started really falling in love with live sound. And I kind of wanted to know, if starting out from a spot like this, where would it be better to start as a stagehand and then just work my way up from there? Or are there opportunities to start in a place higher because I have some experience doing that, where I could learn more as opposed to starting from the very bottom where they might be hesitant to start teaching you more?
I'll jump in real quick if that's cool. My advice whenever I get asked that question, what's the best way to move forward or start off or gain some chops or whatever? The short answer is I say, go get a job at internship making no money at the local rock bar and intern with the grumpy old jerk of a sound guy and learn frequencies, how things hurt, learn how he deals or doesn't deal with artists and how he deals with or doesn't deal with you. Learn how to show up and be on time and present for your gig and do it for a year. And if you can do that and keep a gig for a year and manage your own life, even in a non-income based environment, and manage frequencies and manage people and learn how to listen and listen better, you know what, man, I'll volley. If you've got that kind of rap sheet, I'll volley for any tour that's going out there for you to get on a tour, because that's the stuff that it takes to get out on the road.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
One more thought for you. Mind the gap. See if you can identify some functionality or quality level gaps that are present in your world right now. For example, do you know of any people like in your circle of friends or circle of influence that have audio that completely sucks on a live stream? Is there a way you could help them? Because chances are the answer is yes. And if that's true, each one of those people, you can have them put your information on the corner of their feed, audio by NBAR. Start with working with the opportunities that you have, especially right now, because there are so many of them, and you just have to identify them.
I'll look into that. Thank you.
I would definitely say that if you have an opportunity to work as a stagehand as well, it's a great way to learn all the different moving parts that happen in a venue, and with lighting, and with rigging, and with audio, and you learn all the terminology of being on the stage. You learn what tools to bring to a gig as well, how to work with others, how to communicate well, and that'll give you a big head start as well when you are asked to do something significant, or you're asked to take a role in sound or in another department. You'll learn how all of these moving parts sort of work together to make a show at the end.
Awesome. Looks like we've got another question. Jillian, if you want to chime in, I'll let you ask your question.
Hi, how's everyone doing? My question was pertaining to some of you all saying that you guys are production managers as well, and I just wanted to know what are some of the responsibilities that you guys have, and how does your experience in audio kind of assist you in that role?
I'll take that one.
Go ahead.
So I'm the production manager at my facility where I work now, which means that I am essentially the management level sound engineer. That being said, I advance all the shows. I know when everybody's coming in, when everybody's coming out. I make the schedules for all my guys. I typically have my sound engineers there an hour before load in so they can pink their wedges, ring out whatever they want to. But I give them their stage plots, input lists, and their advance, so they already know what's walking into the room. They already have a schedule of when, typical day is we stagger headliner in, and then support, and then to the opener, and sound check in reverse order. So when we get to show, we're peel away in the order of the show. I'll also deal with any external rentals that we need. If I need to bring in CO2 or confetti, hopefully not confetti, but projection, any of that stuff, any elements that they're not traveling with that the house doesn't have. I also have basically a tech sheet for every room. So when a tour is coming through, they get a list of what gear is in that room and available to them. And then if there's something their show requires that we don't have in-house, then we'll take it from there and bat it back across the table back and forth via email as to whether the promoter's paying for that, whether the artist is paying for that, whether the house is paying for that, or whether that's not really something we're going to do on this show because it doesn't fit the budget versus ticket sales or whatever. Anyway, but my experience being an audio guy has made it easier for me to be a production manager because I can try to foresee things that are happening that I would have liked to have seen as an audio guy. A lot of times with the artists that I tour with, when I'm going to advance the show, I have a standard thing that goes out, and depending on the show, I can go, look, this is how I can save you a little bit of money versus the contract that you've already signed versus what you're spending. So that helps, and that's an easy way to open up a conversation of like, let's start off this conversation with how to save you a couple $100. And that's always a nice way to start a relationship with somebody that you haven't spoke with before, or to start that advance process. But yeah, the advance and the settlement and all that stuff is all part of production. Sometimes that's TM, sometimes it's not. But definitely, if there's any production expenses that are coming along, like we rented extra CO2 tanks for an artist that needed stage smoke or any of that stuff, I've got to make sure that that's turned in and is there for settlement, so we're not left holding the bag at the end of the night. Hopefully that briefly answers some of the broad strokes of it.
Scoop, do you want to speak to your comment about power requirements?
I just wanted to say that, one of those things to consider with your advance, especially with all the powered items and things that are showing up lately. We've got smaller format packages going out places. We've got bigger format packages coming into venues that are not set up to support 3-phase power or 208 power. I think having the power discussion up front Lighting being on separate power service when possible. If not, is an LED lighting versus, halogen tungsten stuff? Are there dimmers on the spin? All those kind of things are including, Martin mentioned earlier, parking. What time are doors? Are there any kinds of things that are, look, man, I do a lot of corporate stuff. So what I want to know is, in the next ballroom over, is there a time where we can't make noise in the ballroom we're in? Because it's not like we're in a microcosm. Firing subs up and time aligning stuff might really be messing with the breakfast, in the room next door. So, you can't accomplish some of these things with more stagehands. Scott, if you want to back that up, being back to the homework thing, do your homework. Power is just inclusive in that homework list.
Yeah.
You're muted, Martin.
The button. It really is a checklist, and it's something that I've very much been able to compartmentalize and have a general application, which includes everything that I need to look at on a daily basis from venue to venue. And in fact, I've even added many things over the years to include on day sheets, like travel distance between hotel and the venue, what the distance is physically in miles or kilometers, how much time it takes to get there, and even in fact, even including the weather forecast, which of course becomes even more important when you're doing outdoor events. And from this time forward till the mid to late fall, in many parts of the country, this is our main touring season where we're going to be doing the majority of outdoor shows. So it really is the little things. And then when you do a different type of show, there are other elements that come into play, such as fly dates. If you're playing in Chicago today and doing a special show for a client for an industrial on the West Coast, well, your full production tour is not going to make it in time. So you have to advance local production. You may have to hire in backline. These are all things that don't necessarily happen on a daily basis, but they absolutely will happen throughout the course of the year. So setting up a template with a checklist on it, which is what I do. I typically start advancing shows 6 weeks in advance when I send out my first production advance. And then sadly, it's often a waiting game of trying to hunt people down, because not everyone is as good at communicating as they should be, perhaps. And a lot of times you're hunting people down just to nail them down to answer questions, much less look at your actual your actual paperwork. I've gotten it down to pretty much a one-page advance, which covers everything that I'm bringing with me on the top and everything I need at the production for the bottom 2/3 of it. And the rest is negotiation over all those fine points. And then I create my day sheet at the end of that for everything from the time we leave the hotel to the time we get there, to what time we're loaded in, what time the labor's going to be needed, all the way through the day until the trailers get loaded and the buses depart for the hotel or the next venue at the end of the night.
And who's handling after show food? Make sure that that's, on there too.
Absolutely crucial.
I will say, I know from experience of doing smaller tours that it seems like sometimes smaller venues, there's people that wear multiple hats. And so either they're some person who's not connected to audio at all, they might actually work at the venue at another role, and this sort of communication for pre-production has been placed in their lap. And they might even view it as kind of like an extra thing, responsibility that they're not even fairly compensated for. And when you're a production manager, it's a little bit like you're kind of going to everyone to make sure that you can do your job well. And it may be just extra time for them, and they may not necessarily have in their schedule, they haven't pre-planned time to talk to people about pre-production. So making it as easy as possible for them to write back to you, keeping, I think like Martin said, he might have a 500-point checklist, but when someone opens his email, they can read minutes. And when he writes in 6 weeks and they don't write back, that instead of being offended, just write back and, oh, I'm sure you're really busy. You know, being compassionate for some of these people and trying to, expect that for you to do a great job, it may take more than one try, and it may take a lot of just being really patient with people and persistent and polite. Yeah. You're muted, Martin.
Communication skills are absolutely key here. I agree. You've got to be level-headed and professionally polite. Not everybody works in the same manner, and you just have to, because you're going to have to work with these people when you get to the venue. And it's just not for that day, because you will be back. You may be back with that artist. You may be back with another artist. This is a business, and the people we work with, our team is the one we travel with, but all of the other teams that are out there, we're not just going to see them once. We're going to see them many, many times over the years. And my philosophy is I much prefer to leave a trail of happiness behind me. I like making friends. I don't want any enemies. Nobody does.
Always know how things went the second time you see somebody.
Absolutely.
When you first step out of the rig and they see you, you immediately know where you stand with them. You want them to smile. You want them to come up and be like, "Oh, good to see you, man."
Kevin, I'm curious if it's different in the classical world versus the rock world, since you obviously have experience in both as far as the responsibilities of a production manager.
I haven't done production managing that much in events like that. A little bit. It goes back to stage volume, and not just not in this case the band's stage volume, but monitor volume of anybody that can't be on in-ears. And being aware of what's going on in the rest of a building, if you're in a performing arts center or a ballroom or anything like that, like there may be a rehearsal hall behind where you're trying to sound check, and maybe they're having a percussion event in there that's going to bleed into what you're trying to do that's really quiet with a small chamber string ensemble. So just being aware of what else is going on in the venue or the complex or nearby, and just scheduling, just making sure everything is lined up and timed accordingly, so that somebody is, one party's not waiting on another to get their job done, and that everything happens in a nice workflow throughout the day, and that every detail is taken care of till the end of the loadout. And or if there's, even in rock stuff, like I was touring in Europe, and a lot of times, like larger or mid larger venues or something like that, like larger clubs they'll be double booked. Like they'll have the curfew to get out will be, for instance, like 11 o'clock, because they're going to have like a rave in there from midnight to 4 a.m. And so you have to know that like you're going to have, or the trains stop running. So your show's going to have to stop at 10:30 because the trains stop running at 11, and people are just going to leave and go home. And because that's when their transit system stops. So just being aware of like all the details about everything from top to bottom, I think is just the most important thing. And just figure out every possible thing that you would never imagine you would need as a detail, and then include it in there, because it's going to come up.
Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. And I'm going to go down the line, and if you guys have any parting tips, tricks, comments, I'll just kind of go down the line as we sign off here. We'll start with you, Martin.
Yep. If you want to be a sound engineer and you want to be a good one, you've absolutely got to own it. Invest in yourself, because once you get started and you're hooked, you'll find that it is just not possible to know everything. There's always something to know. So strive to learn it and absolutely be the best you can be at all times. And most important of all, don't forget, you're a team player. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Scoop, you're up next.
For many relationships that I've been in over the years, a sticky note would land on the refrigerator that said, listen better. And I always wanted to say, well, damn it, I'm a sound guy. That's all I do is listen. So my encouragement, not only in my mirror, but to all of you, is remember to listen better. There's always an opportunity to listen better, be mindful of the present. Don't get lost in the past. Don't get caught up in the future, but be as mindful as you can to the present. Listen better and be mindful of your step. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And if you can't hear the articulation of the T in all of those words, you're moving too fast.
Thanks, Scoop. Kevin.
Wow, how do I answer better than anybody than either of those two? Like, put me behind. Why do you put me right behind those? They just said it. They just like, I can't.
Them's the breaks.
I'm just gonna echo that. I can't say it any better than either of them. Either of those guys did. That's amazing. That's definitely that's it.
Awesome. We've loved having you, Kevin. Crash,
Thanks.
how about you? If you're still with us. How about you, Harold?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what a couple of points about professional communication and self-learning. So, waiting for someone else to tell you to learn a technology, or that something's going to be hot, or that you're going to see it on the next stop, just puts you in a really bad space. So, doing your homework and doing self-directed learning is it's going to be required. It's required in this industry. As Martin said, there are so many consoles out there that if you wait until you're in front of it to know it, or have an understanding of it, or have your show file, as Scoop mentioned, converted over to it, you're going to find yourself at a great disadvantage. So staying ahead of that is important, and that this is a relationship based business too. So those professional communications that you have, those relationships that you build with each other, become important to you. It can be important to you many years in your career going forward. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Thanks. Chris, how about you?
I'd just say just keeping a level head, not freaking out and panicking under stress is always a good, foundation to have. And just going back to just from the sound perspective, I'd say your rock right there is always your signal flow. Always know your signal flow, keep track of that, and know your frequencies. That's a pretty rock solid foundation to know and base everything off of it just from that.
Awesome. All right, Scott, any closing comments?
Make sure you know what the goal and objective is of what you're trying to do as an audio engineer and or an artist, as well as what the goal or objective is of the artist or group that you're working with, or the event that you're working on, because a lot of times those things all should align and they should all serve a common purpose. And if you can figure that part out and be a reasonably good hang during the part of the entire process, then people will want to work with you because you'll continue to bring value and add to rather than take away from the overall purpose of the project or what you're trying to do.
Awesome. And it looks like Crash is back with us. Crash, do you have any closing comments you'd like to give? Oh, you need to unmute yourself, Crash. You're still muted. There we go.
We good?
Now we got you. All right. Let's get your closing comment.
I died and I didn't have a battery backup. No. I wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to thank everybody for donating their time. I did put my email on here, mycrash@mercylounge.com. Any students that have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm just here to help, and I want people to hopefully use some of this time to up their game and come in some solidarity. But there's really some good opportunities right now while everybody's confined to home to learn some new skill sets and to break some new ground. But I want to thank all of our panelists so much. I appreciate you guys taking time away from all the shows we're not doing to do this. So thank you guys all for coming in.
Thanks, Crash. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Scoop. Thanks, Harold. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Bailey, Kevin. I don't know who I'm forgetting. Harold.
Thanks, guys.
Kevin, Martin.
Thanks for having me. It's been great. Good to see everybody too.
Thanks, everybody.
Fun.
All right, Nick, the Zoom chat is yours again. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it very much. It's been fun for me, so it's made
Likewise.
it's made trying to teach live sound from home a lot more enjoyable.